I visited Pittsburgh with a team about 6 years ago and saw how the Pittsburgh Pirates and the Pittsburgh Penguins, the Steelers, the universities, K-12 and philanthropy, and K-12 and local businesses all partnered together on the health of the community. And we took their playbook back to make El Cajon the best place to live, work, play, and raise a family. We stole that from Pittsburgh. We actually stole Grant from Pittsburgh. And we're so excited that Grant now is come to San Diego to lead the Prebys Foundation, but also change and hope for the San Diego region. Please welcome Grant Oliphant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, El Cajon. Did I need to bring my own sizzle team? Actually, I did. My wife, Aradna, my board member, Pete Ellsworth, my coworkers, Aaron Decker and Alexandra Kochevsky are here. Would you please stand? So contrary to what this slide implies, I am only the CEO of the Conrad Prebys Foundation, and really so incredibly honored to be here. Sitting in this audience for the last hour and a half, have been wondering what is left to say. It has been the animating force and privilege of my life to spend my time working only with people who are intent on changing the world. And let me tell you, listening to you all, you have the goods. It's amazing. To be honest, when I agreed to do this talk, I had implemented a policy, since I'm so new in San Diego, that I wasn't giving talks. I wanted to listen and learn and spend time hearing from people before I started opining. But this felt important to me, and as is so often the case, you know, I felt I was doing David a favor when he asked me this. I can tell you standing here right now, David, you did me the favor. Thank you. It is extraordinary to be in a room with this kind of enthusiasm, and one of the reasons that I said yes to David when he asked me was that he spoke to me as apparently David does. You can't say no to the man. But he spoke to me about his love and your love for kids. I had heard about El Cajon back in Pittsburgh. I had heard of what you're doing. I was intrigued by it. But sitting with David and then some of your team and hearing the team talk about love for kids had a transformational effect on me. And what I would like to speak with you about today in the time that I've been given is what it feels like to operate from a place of love in times when that is hard. And coming from Pittsburgh, I can't not quote Fred Rogers. My closest friend in life was the producer of the Fred Rogers Company, and I had the privilege of getting to know Fred before he died. And I've always been amazed by his wisdom. And he operated from a place of believing that our greatest use, our greatest application is to operate from a space of love for other human beings and to acknowledge that that isn't always easy. Sometimes it's hard because of them, sometimes it's hard because of us, sometimes it's hard because of the circumstances. And I think I want to talk about all of that in my comments today, but can we go back? No, this is right. What I want to capture for you is a sense of the moment that we're in and how difficult it can sometimes feel, even when you really believe what I'm saying, to operate from a place of true love and to feel like you can accomplish what you want to accomplish. And I have the opportunity in my work to get to work with people who every day encounter some version of this. Every one of them is a hero to me, as is everyone in this room, because of the work you do. So let's start by talking a little bit about what it is that David keyed in on when he asked me to come and speak to you. 11 years ago, I did a TEDx talk on the notion of countdowns and what it feels like to deal with the urgency we feel in society right now. And I told the story of this woman, Maria de Vries. And Maria de Vries lived in Amsterdam during World War II, and on a particularly cold, brutal night in 1944, a group of Dutch Nazis stormed her house, seized the young Jewish girl that she had been hiding in her little apartment, held a gun to her head, looked at her 7-year-old daughter, and said, "You have 10 seconds to tell us the names of your contacts in the Dutch underground, or we're going to kill you and take your daughter to the camps as well." 10, 9, 8. In that moment, Maria had to make a choice, and she looked around the room, and everything she loved was in that room. A photo of her husband, who had been hauled away to prisoner of war camp as the Germans had invaded. Her daughter, whom she cherished above all else in the world, the young girl that she'd been hiding there as well. The country, the picture of the flag of the country that she had seen invaded and loved. And she knew that she had to make a choice, and she had to think about what her purpose was in being in that space in that moment. 7, 6, 5, 4. What she realized in that moment was that if she said what the man was asking for, if she gave away the names of her contacts in the Dutch underground, because of course she was in the Dutch underground, they would kill her anyway, and everybody she knew. So she made a decision. 3, 2, 1. I don't know anything. I'm just a mom who took pity on a young girl. The man swore at her, but he and his comrades left and said, "We'll be back." But they didn't shoot her, and they didn't take away her daughter. This story has a happy ending. This woman is my grandmother. And the woman I choke up every time I tell this story. The woman, the young girl who she harbored in her apartment survived the war because she had been hidden for a year. But when I thought about that story later, and as I've thought about it in the context of the work I'm privileged to do, I've thought often about what we can learn from people who are faced with real-time, urgent countdowns, and what they can teach us about the type of urgent matters that we deal with in society that feel maybe as urgent as a person holding a gun to our head, but maybe less tangible and less easy to wrap our heads around. What I wanted to convey in the talk I delivered 11 years ago was essentially what Martin Luther King talked about when he spoke about the fierce urgency of now. What Martin Luther King asked society and all its individuals to do was to think differently about social challenges and to accept them as their own and to recognize that the moment to deal with them is not later, but now in the moment when they're happening. And I felt it was an important point to convey that we need to internalize this as a society. 11 years later, I believe that as profoundly as I did then, but I also think we may have learned the wrong lesson along the way. And I'm going to talk with you about what I think is the right lesson for people who are in the caring and loving business. So let's talk a little bit about what countdowns are. The word countdown didn't actually enter the American language until about 1952, 1953. And it came, of course, it was actually originally used in a 1929 film by a German filmmaker around a rocket launch, ironically, but the term came into our language as a result of its use in the rocketry program and then later with reference to explosives. And it quickly became a tool or a device that our society used to talk about anything, any purposeful counting towards some moment where something huge would happen. And if you know, this is not new. Ours is not the first society to encounter pressure. Noah had 7 days to load the ark, so it kind of is as old as human history. But we have invented this language around counting down to a particular moment that we feel pressured to meet the challenge of. And in some ways, we've enshrined this as a universal tool of our society. So there are countdowns toward Christmas or the holidays. There are a countdown towards birthdays, the start of the school year, the end of the school year. I guarantee you some of your students have started that one already, no offense. This is just part of our culture. It's also increasingly being built into as a tool of the tools of distraction that our society loves. Countdowns are being built into every app that you can imagine to keep you. I'm trying to learn Spanish right now on an app on my phone, and it contacts me at 11 o'clock at night to know I have 1 hour to keep my streak going. And this is a universal part of our society now. But it also has become a heightened part of our conversation about the future of the planet that we're on. So there is a sense now that we see the language of countdowns being repeated more and more often in the context of the broad social problems that I was talking about 11 years ago. So climate change is a great example where a very important government report came out last year about the future of the planet. And unfortunately, some of the reporting around that misrepresented the results and the actual science of it. But they said, well, we have 11 years, 12 years to save the planet. Then that wasn't good enough. No, you better make that 18 months to save the planet. Just in case you're wondering, the 18 months have passed. We're operating in a moment in our culture where everything feels as though, because it is, accelerating and urgency is growing around major issues that we see as important. The pandemic greatly accelerated this trend. And we now have conversations as a routine part of our dialogue that the next election or the last election was the last chance to save existential issues in our society: women's rights, civil rights, LGBTQ+ rights, a sense that everything in our society is somehow on the line. And this is manifested all the way down to a tool that some scientists have tried to use in getting us to focus on our own potential to destroy ourselves through our willingness to erode the things that actually make modern life possible. This is called the doomsday clock. And according to the doomsday clock, we have 100 seconds left to live. Enjoy them. It can feel overwhelming to be operating in our society at the moment. Can feel overwhelming, not just in the context of what happened with the pandemic, but every day waking up and knowing what the kids that you are dealing with are hearing and internalizing and feeling about the world. I know in our work, much of what we hear from kids is about their own sense of stress about many of these issues. So suddenly, as a society, it feels as though we have countdowns toward addressing climate, and we do. That we have tolerated for far too long racial inequity in our society, and there is a moment coming where we will no longer be able to avoid that, and we do. We have a sense of wave after wave of pandemic coming. That's real. We have people who will tell us that there is a war coming, even a civil war coming. and people will count down towards that. We hear countdowns around the fate of our democracy and the health of our way of life and our government. We hear countdowns around the future of the economy. And maybe the one most relevant to you in your everyday work, and certainly of huge concern to us, is countdowns around the mental health of our young people and how long we can go on creating the kind of stress that all of this does on young people without giving them a release and a way out and a path forward. So I'm sorry to be a downer. I promise there's a way out of this. But it's important to acknowledge that this is, in a way, you all talked about it in the previous hour and a half, the importance of culture. We live in a culture of urgency where crisis feels imminent. And it's partly because of what we've been through the past few years. We have successfully, I think, internalized the message of the fierce urgency of now, but we've turned it into this sense that it's never-ending constants, too much, too late, too many things going on all the time. It's the fierce urgency of now, and now, and now, and now, and now. And how do we adapt? Unfortunately, many take the wrong lesson from this. This is where some people go. Some of the most respected climate scientists that I've had the privilege to work with, people like Michael Mann and Jonathan Foley at the Drawdown Project, have described what's happening as they see it as a world in which we're so much focused on never-ending crisis and feeling so much crisis, and our kids are feeling so much crisis, that it is leading to one of two results. It's either leading to denial of the problem, where we just pretend it doesn't exist. And I believe that every one of the bullet points I showed you around the crises that we're experiencing are real. So I don't think denial is healthy. But it also leads to a sense of doomism, of fatalism, of the notion that there's nothing that can be done, that a man is holding a gun to our head, and there it is. And what can we do? So let me talk with you just for a moment about how we use countdowns psychologically as human beings. We use them basically for three purposes. We use them to build tension. This is what the Dutch Nazi was doing when he invaded my grandmother's flat. We use them to control our emotions. Every one of you who has ever said to a child, I'm going to give you the count of 3, you're also controlling your own emotions. Most importantly, we use them to structure our activities around complex deadlines, around approaching deadlines that are far enough off in the future. I am a perennial procrastinator, so this one is especially important to me. But we use them so that we can structure what we need to get done by a time or date certain. And we need them. The reason we need them, they actually serve a very real function in our culture, is that we as human beings are lousy, it turns out, at fixing complex issues in time. This means we can understand the complexity of the issue, and we can understand the clock. We cannot put them together to save our lives. We struggle with how to do that. We're also lousy at dealing with choice and distraction. Overwhelming choice overwhelms us, and as every one of us knows who has a smartphone, distraction is better than anything we're doing. The third reason that we need them is because they help us break complex tasks into manageable pieces. They let us figure out how to look at a complex issue out in the world and take it and turn it into the pieces that we can personally manage. It's actually why the space program began countdowns to begin with. Every number corresponds to a set of tasks that Mission Control is doing in order to fulfill its mandate. The point is that these that these countdowns that we use are useful devices. They are a way of telling the story of reality. When I mentioned the report earlier that was characterized in the media as we have 11 years to save the world. The International Government Panel on Climate Change issued that report. And what they really wanted to say was the volatility of climate change increases in 11 years if we don't successfully act to rein in the temperature change to 1.5 degrees Celsius. It doesn't mean that the planet ends, but our ability to control what comes afterwards is diminished. But the 11 years as a countdown became a useful device for telling the story of the fierce urgency of now. If we care about this, then we have to act within the time frame that the countdown tells us. But the countdown is not the entire story, because the entire story would include all of the things that society is presently doing to try and tackle this problem. All of the ways in which people are talking about it, all of the inroads being made on the issue. In fact, the latest piece of legislation coming out of Washington on this, which I personally applaud, will make a significant advance towards meeting the climate change goals. But what people have done in the last 11 years since I delivered that talk has actually done more than that next round of government action will do. Because the whole story looks at what we also do as individuals and collectively along the way towards making change. To help illustrate this point, I'm going to tell you another story that I've never told publicly about a man named Neil Alexander. And the reason this story is important to me is that I met Neil Alexander literally as I was writing that TED Talk about countdowns. I was sitting at my desk in my office, then at the Pittsburgh Foundation, the community foundation for Pittsburgh. And my development director came into the room and said to me, "There's somebody you've got to meet." I said, "I'm kind of busy." She said, "You really got to meet this guy." I said, "I'm really busy." And she said, "No, you've really got to meet this guy. He wants to start a fund here. He has ALS. He's going to die in a couple of years, and he wants to work with us." Now, I believe the universe speaks to us sometimes, and that one I would have been just insane to have missed. I was working on a talk about what we can learn from people who are facing life-ending countdowns. And in walked a man who was facing a life-ending countdown. Neil was extraordinary, faced with the prospect that he was a young man, he had been diagnosed with ALS. He knew he had a few years to live. He actually didn't know how many. The doctors had told him basically to go away and live his life. And he made a decision, faced with his own countdown, he made a decision that he was going to tap into some deeper truth. His purpose in that moment, his why, was that he wanted his kids to see him living, not dying. He wanted his kids to see him working towards something more than his own end. And so he spent the rest of his life creating a foundation called the Live Like Lou Foundation, named for Lou Gehrig, who was the first person for whom ALS was named, a celebrity sports player from many decades ago. And he turned that mission of his over the next few years into raising $10 million on behalf of curing this disease and bringing dignity to people who suffer from it. An extraordinary end to an extraordinary man's life. Also a very normal man. No different than you or I or any one of us in this room. But just somebody who understood that faced with a countdown, he had a choice. He could either ignore it or he could turn it into an opportunity for purpose. This is actually what I have learned from studying people like Neil and like my grandmother, like Randy Pausch, who was a professor at Carnegie Mellon University and delivered a famous last lecture that if you haven't seen it, I'd urge you to go online and please take a look. How we break out of this moment of pressure that we sometimes feel in our culture right now, how we break the doom denial cycle, is really important. And what I've learned about how to do this from these individuals is the following. It's basically three simple things. The first is what I call fierce acceptance. These folks deal with reality. They take the moment where they have been given a diagnosis, or when a person breaks into their apartment, or when they're faced with a challenge that they cannot figure out how to surmount, and they acknowledge that that's what they're dealing with. They focus on it completely, and they say, this is the situation. I can't pretend, I can't wish my way out of that. The second thing they do is reframe it. They take that truth and they say, maybe that isn't the whole story. Maybe there's something in here that I'm missing. Maybe there is a larger thing beyond this countdown that I'm faced with that really matters in the context of this countdown. And then the third thing they do is they transform that around purpose. Having identified what's important to them, what matters to them, they actually begin to think about what their contribution to it is. What we sometimes miss is simply this, that the countdowns in our lives, and we all have them, every one of you has them in your lives right now. Every one of you is thinking of someone right now that you know and love, or maybe yourself, who is facing something in their life that they wish they weren't, or that is challenging or hard, and struggling with how to deal with it. And what we sometimes miss about that reality is the countdown actually isn't the whole story. The pressure that we're feeling in our culture right now isn't the whole story. The need to get it completely right, to solve the ailments of the world all at once, the pressure we put on our kids by telling them that they need to believe that too, isn't the whole story. What matters about countdowns is what we do with them. It's how we turn that negative energy into something immensely positive. There's a great illustration of this that I've been thinking about lately, and I was listening to some podcasts as I was thinking about this talk to help me figure out how to integrate this. But there's a guy who is not really a time management guru, but he has become a time management guru named Oliver Burkeman, who has written a book called 4,000 Weeks. And the core concept of his book is that the average person's lifespan is 4,000 weeks. And when you see that number, your first reaction is, oh my gosh, 4,000, that's not much. It feels like it's over in a blink. 4,000 weeks, how could that be right? But if you do the math teachers are already doing the math. The math works. That's about the average lifespan. We have 4,000 weeks. And one of the things that Oliver Burkeman says is people approach it from a scarcity perspective, but it's really huge. Think about what we get to do during that time. The people we get to meet, the experiences we get to have, the problems we get to solve. And his counsel is to view it as an opportunity rather than as a limitation. I was thinking about the 4,000 weeks in the context of all of you and this extraordinary crowd and the incredible energy of this room and of the work you do. And if my math is right, through the course of an average student's lifetime, if they stay with you for all of the years that they're in school, you will have them a total of 450 weeks of their 4,000. But in that 450 weeks, They will learn how they think about themselves and how they think about each other. They'll learn the basics that you teach them. They'll learn how to add and subtract, read, write, but they'll learn how to learn. They'll learn how to ask questions. They'll learn how to think critically. They'll learn how to engage productively in community. And what I loved about the videos that David shared with you before I came on was that you saw kids doing that in real time over the course of those TED Talks, where they had grown in their capacity to see their relationship and connections with everyone else that they're meeting along the way through school. Are you solely responsible for that? Of course not. And that's part of the point. 450 weeks feels like a tiny amount of time. I know not every day. Every day it feels like a lot. But it feels like a tiny amount of time to change a life. But it is a period of time when you will absolutely change the lives that you encounter. And not through the course of the 450, not because you will be with them 450 weeks. You won't. It will happen one single interaction at a time. Every single one of those interactions will matter. So I was thinking about, humbly, because I don't do what you do, and I'm in awe of what you all do, and I celebrate you as heroes, but I thought it would be important to maybe take a crack at thinking about, how does this apply to you? What does fierce acceptance look like for you? You know, Fred Rogers, the second part of his quote was that, the quote I started with, was that love means accepting the other person just the way they are, right here and right now. So you will deal with yourself at moments where you feel imperfect, with kids at moments where they feel imperfect, with situations, lots, where everything feels broken. And that's the situation. And it's okay. It is okay to be frustrated over that. It is okay to acknowledge that it can be limiting sometimes. And it's okay to accept that it's hurtful, even. But then you can do the unique thing of reframing around possibility in terms of thinking about what else you might bring. And this is not about a cosmic notion. It's about interactions, as I said, that you'll have every day, where you think about your frustration, maybe not translating that to kids, or showing them that they are loved, giving them the sense that they matter. And I am literally telling you, what feels so good about this moment is, having seen the last hour and a half, I know I'm not telling you anything you don't know. So consider this, please, affirmation for what you're all doing. If you can take these moments that in American education, we hear so much about how frustrating and difficult it is, we don't walk into many rooms where the energy is like this. El Cajon has this, it's true. You have, when I said you have the goods at the beginning, you have something where you reframe the work around possibility with your kids. If we can go back one slide for a moment. And you do that by transforming your piece of it. You do that by, in your everyday interactions, you figure out what your piece is to make a kid feel accepted, to let them know they belong, to let them know that the doors are open for them to make the advances that they need to. So right before I walked into this room, I called my friend who used to be Fred Rogers, the head of Fred Rogers production company, and I said, what do I need to know, since he's an educator himself? And he said, Grant, everyone in that room every day is dealing with kids, whether they're a teacher or a custodian or working in administration or driving a bus, They are dealing with kids. And every one of those interactions with kids is magic. And you have the opportunity, all he wanted me to convey to you, which is what I wanted to convey anyway, is that you have the opportunity every single day in a world that feels like sometimes it can feel like it's falling apart, like the adults haven't got it figured out, like we're headed on a collision course to a countdown that feels bad. You have the opportunity to undo that in every single interaction by creating an open, welcoming, accepting space where kids see the possibility instead of the negativity. There is a notion from a piece of Jewish wisdom called the Talmud that none of us, sometimes we all feel like we have to be the ones to deliver change. In my field, this is a particular problem because people in roles like mine, but I think also in roles like yours, feel like my career will have been a failure if I don't, by the end of it, have changed everything about the world that I see that's broken. And the reality is, we are all part of a journey. What Martin Luther King understood when he talked about the fierce urgency of now, what Neil Alexander understood, what my grandmother understood, was that they were responsible for their piece of it. So they had to feel the urgency of the moment. They had to accept their task. But what they were going to focus on was their task. They were going to do their piece particularly well. Your mission is delightful. It really is. It is, when I heard about your mission, I thought this is the most gratifying mission for a school district I have ever heard, and sign me up. The idea of happy kids, you didn't start with educated, well-testing kids. How did you miss that? You started with happy kids, because that's actually the formula for how we become successful in life. And then you talked about healthy relationships. So happy kids experiencing healthy relationships, and then you put them on the path to meaningful, gainful employment. We at the Prebys Foundation have been doing a lot of research the last 5 months into what it takes to create a well and healthy community. And it turns out it takes 3 things to create a well and healthy community. It takes people who have a sense of purpose. They know that they have a mission in life. It takes people who have a sense of opportunity. They are plugged into some meaningful role that will allow them to be successful. And they feel that they're treated with belonging, that they are treated with dignity and respect that allows them to be part of a larger community. It's not quite the same order, but it's basically your mission statement. The same values are present in both. When I gave the talk 11 years ago, I ended with what has now become this terribly overused piece of poetry. It's a meme everywhere. But Mary Oliver's poem, The Summer's Day, she asked this provocative question of people about what will you do with your life? What will you make use of your time? I was always glad that Oliver Burkeman didn't get here so that this didn't read your 4,000 wild and precious weeks. But this is a question healthy people actually get to ask themselves. And we get to transform our lives through the asking of it. It's the countdown from 1 to whatever comes afterwards. And we have in that space, that precious little space, the opportunity to change the world in the corner that we touch it and make the profoundest of differences. And I actually do think you get to do that in a way that none of the rest of us do, because you do get to ask kind of the Oliver Burkeman question. You get to ask, you have made your careers being about what will you help kids do, so that as they look at the life that stretches before them, they're going to be in a position to answer this question in a way that is uplifting and exciting and draws on them all the potential that they have inside of them. I just want to say, what I feel in this group and in this room is you're already doing it. So maybe the takeaway is keep doing it. Thank you.
A round of applause for Grant Oliphant. Thank you so much. That's perfect.
You want that?
Yes, thank you.